Nathan. Jacob, you can go ahead.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Jacob Hancock, and I'm a Marquette sports performance intern for the fall 2020 semester. And I really appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity to share my annual plan for Irish dance. So I wanted to start off by showing a quick video from the World Championships in 2018. All right, so as you can see from that video, Irish dance is constituted by a very rigid torso and upper body, while the lower body has very rapid motion going on. We have some small and big jumps occurring there. And that performance that I just showed you was actually a hard shoe performance where the material of the shoe is much stiffer, and when the athlete hits the ground with their shoe, it contributes to the percussion of the song. And speaking of the music, it's usually a traditional Irish folk music that's being used. It's played by bagpipes, and all these performances have a similar tone in terms of the music. And I should note that we're programming for a very competitive Irish dancer. So the competition is a scored competition called a Feis. And we'll talk more about that in just a second. So for now, we'll talk about some of the history of Irish dance. Its modern day popularity came really from this musical called Riverdance in the 90s. But way before that, when it first started, it started off as these Celtic rituals, and they evolved into performances that were spread across Europe through these dancing experts that would travel across Europe and spread the style of dance. It eventually became so popular that it was performed in front of royalty. And then in the modern day, like I said, this musical called Riverdance in the 90s became incredibly popular, and it introduced a lot of people to the style of dance. A lot of Americans saw this musical and became interested in the sport. So the Feis is the competition. It's the word they use for the competition. It's a scored competition where there's 3 rounds. The first 2 rounds are used. They can be either a hard or soft shoe performance, but the dancers are given a score, and based on the first 2 rounds, they'll be determined whether or not they can continue into the third and final round, where they have a chance to increase their score and eventually, win the competition with the number of points they have. So they're judged based on technique, performance, stage presence, posture, and the jumps that they perform. And some of the most typical motions that we'll see during this performance, we're going to see a lot of jumping. So these can be these high jumps like seen here, or more of those small, like ankle-driven jumps. And from that, we're going to need to land. So landing mechanisms are incredibly important for these dancers, as they need to land properly to reduce their risk of injury. And we'll also see a great deal of rotation occurring. This can happen whether it's in the air or on the ground. And finally, we'll see a lot of bracing and upper body stabilization. From the video, you can see that the lower body moves incredibly fast, while the upper body needs to remain very still. So there's a lot of muscular endurance and core strength that the athlete needs to have in order to keep their posture throughout the performance. Some of the injury mechanisms. So we'll see, there's a lot of jumps occurring here. So we'll mainly see a lot of overuse injuries, mainly tendonitis, stress fractures. But we can see some acute injuries if the athlete takes a wrong step during performance, or they really forcefully jam their toe into the floor. You can see some toes that break, or you can see some avulsions. And thinking about the kinematic chain, if we see if there's an issue at the ankle, we can see how that would affect the knee and the hip as well. So there are 3 major competitions that these athletes train for, and they're commonly referred to as regionals, nationals, and the world championships, or worlds. And worlds is the most elite competition. This is where all the dancers want to get to. It's a competition between many countries across the world. And nationals and regionals, on the other hand, are specific to the United States. And it's something that United States dancers can use to qualify for the worlds. All right, so now we'll get into the annual plan. This competition schedule gets a little tricky here. So as you can see, worlds is in April, and this is where we want the athlete to peak. This is the highest competition level that we want them at. But we need to qualify for the next year's worlds in July at nationals or in December for regionals. So this is why we'll see 2 in-seasons and 2 off-seasons. This first off-season in May and June is a little bit different than the second off-season. It could be called a postseason or this transition period, but we really want to rest the athlete for a little bit in May and have them to maintain that peak as best as they can until July. And then we have a couple of options. So if the athlete is able to qualify at nationals, we can adjust our schedule and not peak in December and use this as more of a practice. Or if we end up not qualifying here, we can again shift the schedule and try to peak again in December to qualify for the next year's Worlds. So focusing in on the off season, our main goal here is hypertrophy. So although Irish dancers don't need to be really big and muscular, they do need to have a great deal of muscle mass in their lower body to perform these jumps. And we'll shift that focus to strength in the muscular strength in the in-season. So we'll start off with hypertrophy here in the off-season. To do this, we're going to focus on a high volume, low intensity scheme, and we'll be lifting more days than we will be training in the studio. So some of the exercises that we're going to focus on here, we're really going to focus on plyometrics. The stretch shortening cycle is incredibly important to these dancers as they jump throughout the entire performance. So they really need to train their stretch shortening cycle, and we'll focus on some high bar back squats, some Olympic derivatives, and ankle dominant exercises. And like I said before, we'll focus on the core for the posture and some flexibility and mobility. And some key performance indicators in the off season, we're going to focus on a vertical jump, and we'll add some more in later. So now we're in the preseason, and here our focus is on transitioning from this hypertrophy in the off season to strength. So this is kind of an in-between transition period for the athlete to get to a more muscular strength training. And it's kind of like where these two lines meet. We're going to focus on a moderate volume and moderate intensity scheme. And in the studio, we've increased the amount of days we're training there, and we've decreased the amount of days that we're lifting. So exercises, we're still going to do plyometrics, but as I just mentioned, we're increasing the amount of time that we're spending in the studio, jumping and performing. So we don't want to contribute more to the amount of steps and foot contacts per week. So it's really important to be aware of the other side of their training, because you don't want to overwork the athlete with these plyometrics. They can be very tiring for them, and we want to make sure that their foot contacts are kept at a relatively normal level. We'll still focus on some Olympic derivatives and core and flexibility and mobility. Here, for our key performance indicators, we're going to start to think more about flexibility and mobility. So we can possibly use the sit and reach for this, and also just having conversations with the athlete, talking about their flexibility and watching their performances. Now we'll move on to the in-season. During the in-season, we are going to focus on strength and then maintaining the flexibility and mobility that the athlete has. So the amount of days that they're training here has significantly increased from the off season, and we're really going to decrease the amount of days that they're lifting. And to do that, we're going to focus on a low volume, high intensity scheme. Exercise type here, you can see that the plyometrics are minimal as the competitions are occurring and they're practicing in the studio. We really don't want to overwork them with the plyometrics. So this is a week by week thing that we're going to have to look at. We really don't want to do plyometrics on a week that they are going to be performing in Worlds or something. And then again, these same ankle dominant exercises, core and flexibility, mobility. And we'll use the same key performance indicators here. For the in-season, we're going to be using some velocity-based training. And the reason why it's used during the in-season is because we're focusing on this high intensity and low volume. So we have the time, and we want to maximize the time that the athlete is spent in the lifting. So for this, we might use a gym aware system, something similar to measure that, for the athlete to be more aware of their velocity that they're moving the bar during their lifting sessions. And because the goal is high intensity, we'll be more on this side of the spectrum, and we might do something like limit the amount of velocity loss rep after rep in order to maintain that high intensity. And the last aspect that I've programmed for is rest. It's incredibly important to think about rest and have conversations with the dancers throughout the entire year. It shouldn't just be a one-time conversation. This is a continual thing week after week. We want to make sure that we're emphasizing sleep, nutrition, time off of training, and we may question some of these typical rest principles like icing. If we want to increase blood flow to an area, do we really want to ice? Maybe in some situations, yes, some situations, no. So we'll use our physiology background to kind of understand that. And then the biggest thing here is just making sure that the athletes are aware of this week after week. It's incredibly important for their training. And with that last aspect that I programmed for, I'll open it up to you and see if you have any questions. I really appreciate this opportunity to share this with you.
Emily, straight in again. Go ahead.
Yes. Hi, Jacob. Emily here. Thanks again for the presentation. I think Irish dance, I saw a couple through your pictures. There's, I think, an interesting shoe wear that they use. So one form, they have a very rigid, structured shoe that's very hard. And then there's another one that has a very minimal shoe. Knowing that they can potentially do both kinds, how do you approach the footwear or lack thereof footwear that they may use during your training?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the athletes will change the type of shoe that they're wearing based on what performance they're giving for whatever competition. So they should be used to both kinds based on their studio training. The other thing that I wanted to mention is because it's a lot of ankle movement, and I don't know if the video is coming through well, but in the video, you could see that the dancer would have very mobile and flexible ankles. We want to make sure that we're focusing on ankle exercises throughout the entire year so that if they do have a misstep or the shoe, they're not used to it, we want to make sure that we reduce the risk of injury there.
Emily, just on my wavelength all the time. Same question was coming from me, so that's a good one. I see Bobby, you got your hand up, so Bobby, go ahead and unmute and ask away.
Hey, Jacob, thanks for the presentation. I noticed throughout your presentation that you mentioned flexibility as a main point of importance for your dancers. Do you have anything in particular that you are looking to implement? And then with that, specific ranges of motion that you're looking for your Irish dancers to be able to move through? Thanks.
Yeah, great question. So I focus on my program for a really elite level dancer. So they should have this flexibility coming in already to perform at the level that they are. But we need to, make sure that they're keeping up with that and maintaining it throughout the season. So I don't want to program for a specific range of motion, especially if they get injured one week or something, or they're not having a great week. What I do want to do is make sure that we focus on, in the warm-ups, having these dynamic stretches and really spend a lot of time doing that. And then afterwards, after our lifting session, we really want to make sure that we emphasize some static stretching so that they're getting it not only in their studio training, but we're also working on it in our lifting sessions.
Wands, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a quick question. I was originally going to ask about the shoes too, but Emily beat us to that one. I noticed after Worlds, when you're going into the national competition, it looked like you went straight from off season right in season. I didn't know if you feel like there was a need to like kind of skip that preseason phase if they were going to like restart lifting, or how would you? Because it's obviously kind of weird to have an off season in the middle of like a whole year season. I was just curious how you train from like Worlds to nationals.
Yeah, that's a really good question. The competition schedule makes it really tricky. And I labeled it as an off season because I wanted to use some of the same principles from the other off season there. But really, it could be called a transition period because we don't want to completely like detrain this athlete before nationals, but we also don't want to overwork them and maintain this in season for that long because the competition is so close. So I want to give the athlete an opportunity to reset their body and not necessarily peak again in nationals because they do have another opportunity to qualify in December. But it's more of an opportunity to try to maintain that peak as much as they can, but yet not overwork themselves.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yes, good presentation. Jacob, I have a question on this as well. So obviously Irish dance is a pretty unique sport as far as sports goes. It has increased in popularity massively, and there's a Irish dance studio just down the road from where I live actually as well. Where did you look when you were doing your research to look to program for the sport? Was there information specifically out there about Irish dance, or did you have to look at kind of what you might consider to be field adjacent sports like other dance styles that you could take inspiration from?
Yeah, I really strayed away from focusing on other dance styles because Irish dance is so specific with the lower body motions. So I really focused on researching solely Irish dance. And I found a lot of information out on the internet from the World Irish Dance Federation and just some YouTube videos watching them dance a lot. And I also reached out to a former intern, Bobby Hawk, who is an Irish dancer, and he competed at Worlds. So he really helped me to understand the competition and how it works. That's probably the hardest thing to research, is to know how the competition works from like an outside, because I've never seen Irish dancing in person. So there's a lot of information out on the web, but Bobby really helped me a lot.
Good. Yeah, it's good to see our connections working for you. And I know that Nathan, in his annual plan, he was able to connect with a couple of pros and coaches in the korfball world as well, which is really, really unique as well. So that's great. Good. I'm just double checking. Bobby Teal, you still have a hand raised. I'm just making sure you don't have a second question. Hand's gone.
Yeah, I actually did want to ask a second question.
Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned that you would do a lot of ankle exercises. Did you have anything specific in mind?
Yeah, I did. So I really would focus on a lot of banded exercises to get in every single plane of motion, and a lot of plantar flexion motions, maybe some calf raises, weighted. These athletes are obviously highly skilled in that plantar flexion motion, so some weighted calf raises. And I think the banded ankle exercises are incredibly important because you see that the dancers have to move their ankle, their foot, in almost every single plane. They're using a lot of motion there. So banded exercises would help them work in every single plane. It's easy. Obviously, plantar flexion is easy to train for with calf raises, but some of those other movements are harder.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
Good job, Jacob. Okay, so if you could stop sharing your screen, I'll stop the recording here. And then we'll have Onesie. You can start sharing your screen, and then I'll start recording.
All right.